In The Remains of the Day, Kazuo Ishiguro constructs a silence so absolute that it becomes symphonic. The novel is a meditation on the voice deprived of dialogue, a world in which speech echoes only within the bounds of self-discipline. At first glance, Stevens's narrative appears as a monologue, a meticulously ordered memoir of professional propriety. Yet under that surface restraint, pulses a dense polyphony, voices repressed, displaced, internalized. Ishiguro transforms the form of confession into a laboratory of dialogic struggle, showing how language itself can imprison or redeem. Within Stevens's impeccable diction, his habit of understatement and euphemism, resides a broken chorus. Miss Kenton's unspoken protests, Lord Darlington's catastrophic misjudgments, the unsaid laughter of the servants' hall, and the neglected needs of the heart. The story, read through Bachtin's lens, becomes the tragedy of monologism, a human life reduced to the single register of correctness, and thereby deaf to the answering voice of the world. Stevens's narration is crafted as continuous present masquerading as recollection. The journey he takes across the English countryside, ostensibly a holiday, is in truth an odyssey through the ruins of discourse. Every landscape reflection, every hedgerow and mist-shrouded hill, stirs fragments of other voices long suppressed. Ishiguro situates his chronotope between two historical epochs, the dying world of interwar aristocracy and the democratic post-war present. This temporal threshold mirrors Bachtin's chronotope of crisis, a moment when language itself must change valence. The grand idiom of dignity, greatness, duty, service, was once a linguistic code of social order. By the time of Stevens's journey it has turned into anachronism. The butler's words wander the countryside like ghosts searching for listeners. His monologic devotion to hierarchy collapses against the dialogic equality of the modern age. From its first pages, The Remains of the Day presents itself as the autobiography of a servant. Yet the very notion of autobiography is here subverted. Autobiography presumes reflexive dialogue, the self turned toward its own past as other. Stevens, however, cannot engage such dialogue, his voice is sealed within the conventions of professional standard. Ishiguro exploits this limitation to reveal language's double voice. When Stevens describes his father's decline, his tone is stoically impersonal, yet between words we hear the crack of filial grief. The absence of explicit emotion becomes form of expression, like silence in music. The butler suppresses narration of love, yet the text recreates it as echo. For Bachtin, every utterance contains traces of another's voice. In Ishiguro's hands, repression itself becomes dialogic medium. Each pause, each deferential, indeed, signals the presence of what cannot be spoken. The voices that haunt Stevens's monologue are numerous. Most poignantly, Miss Kenton's, later Mrs. Ben's, expressed both through memory and in the reconstructed letters he reads. Her language contrasts with his precision, spontaneous, ironic, warm. She teases him, challenges him, occasionally disobeys. This dialogic countercurrent injects vitality into the otherwise sterile house of Darlington Hall. But Stevens, trained to uphold a monologic universe where the employer's command defines reality, cannot admit her voice's validity. He translates flirtation into insubordination, affection into impropriety. In Bakhtinian terms, Miss Kenton embodies the dialogic principle, the insistence that meaning is shared. Stevens's refusal is not merely emotional failure, it is epistemological. To accept her laughter would be to recognize the relativity of hierarchy, to enter the carnival of affection where status dissolves. Thus love appears in The Remains of the Day as forbidden carnival, its joy fatal to the rigid grammar of service. Within Darlington Hall, Ishiguro stages a microcosm of monologic order. The house is organized as an orchestration of silence, commands descend, replies are minimal, acknowledgement requires neutral phrasing. The servants move through corridors like clauses in an obedient sentence. Yet into this syntax, Ishiguro inserts fissures, moments when words fail to contain meaning. During the conference of political gentlemen, for example, Stevens calmly endures humiliation at their hands. They test him on political knowledge, treating him as a musing artifact. His dignified responses, I am unable to assist on such matters, sir, mask ferment of unrecognized irony. The reader hears two voices, the butler's polite self-effacement and Ishiguro's subtle moral indictment of class cruelty. The episode becomes carnivalesque by inversion, masters play fools before the servant who alone retains composure. The social hierarchy, propped by monologic discourse, exposes itself as absurd theater. The carnival in Ishiguro's world lacks color, laughter, or grotesque display, it is carnival through negation. The reversal of values occurs not amid festivity but within stillness, when meaning slips from decorum's grip. The novel's English countryside, visited by Stevens and filled with polite inns and deferential conversations, turns into its own parody. Ordinary people speaking freely about politics, bantering with strangers, represent a new linguistic order, heteroglossia of democracy replacing the monologic dignity of the manor. Their speech confounds Stevens, he overexplains himself, misreads tone, attempts to perform courtesy as ritual instead of communication. Each encounter becomes an inadvertent comedy of misinterpretation, the butler lost in the carnival of ordinary speech. Bokton's laughter resounds faintly here as English irony, the quiet smile of the interlocutor who recognizes the man's anachronism yet responds kindly. Through these dialogues, Ishiguro depicts social transition as linguistic carnival, the old register stumbling amid the heterogeneous tongues of the present. Language in the remains of the day thus serves simultaneously as prison and revelation. Stevens's vocabulary, dignity, greatness, professionalism, functions as verbal mask inherited from Victorian moralism. Each term appears authoritative, but actually conceals anxiety. The word dignity, repeated like mantra, suppresses multiplicity. For Bokton, monologic language equates to power, it seeks to close meaning. Yet Ishiguro's prose exposes cracks in the facade. Every repetition slightly alters intonation, in the variations we perceive irony. Dignity becomes, by the novel's end, a hollow sign, emptied of universal content, meaningful only as relic of Stevens's defensive system. His verbal restraint mirrors Lord Darlington's moral blindness, both men speak languages of self-enclosure, deaf to moral polyphony of the age. At Lord Darlington's fatal banquet for the Nazi sympathizers, the tension between monologism and dialogism reaches its political apogee. The aristocrat imagines diplomacy as rehearsal of the old paternal voice, the gentlemanly conversation that will persuade the Germans through decency. In this theater of civility, other voices are absent. Jewish guests, democratic advisers, the servants. Language becomes pure monologue disguised as dialogue. Ishiguro constructs the dinner scene as tragic masquerade, servants glide silently, politicians converse in euphemism, moral catastrophe unfolds in perfect manners. This is the high society's parody of carnival, an inversion that destroys rather than renews. When the scene is recalled years later, only the echo of glassware remains. Stevens's narration cannot articulate condemnation, but the heteroglossia of memory, our awareness of history's outcome, answers for him. The reader becomes the novel's dialogic partner, completing meanings the narrator suppresses. The figure of Mr. Faraday, the American owner who replaces Lord Darlington, introduces a contrasting speech universe, casual idiom, teasing banter, and democratic informality. His jokes, repeatedly misunderstood by Stevens, function as acts of linguistic liberation. Here the narrative enacts Bokton's carnivalesque renewal, hierarchical distance between master and servant morphs into comedic exchange of mockery. Faraday's witticisms, however harmless, threaten Stevens because they demand improvisation, a living response. To joke is to acknowledge equality, precisely what Stevens's discourse cannot do. His awkward laughter, forced and belated, reflects his struggle to join the polyphonic present. Ishiguro stages the servant's incapacity to play as the tragedy of arrested dialogue, the man who cannot participate in humor cannot exist in carnival, and thus cannot live fully in language. Throughout the novel, physical gestures replace conversation. When Miss Kenton knocks at Stevens's door late at night, or when she sits silently after hearing of his father's death, the space between them vibrates with unsaid dialogue. Bokton reminds us that silence too is aggressivity, it awaits response. Ishiguro composes these silences as polyphonic chords, the reader hearing both restraint and desire simultaneously. Such moments convert the private domestic scene into moral allegory, civilization's obsession with self-control swallowing its own capacity for empathy. The tragedy of Stevens and Miss Kenton is not unspoken love alone, but the destruction of dialogic relation within society's linguistic codes. The journey structure of the novel, a motoring trip through England, serves as narrative chronotope paralleling Don Quixote's wanderings or Odysseus's homecoming. Like those archetypal pilgrims, Stevens travels through landscapes of irony, confronting reflections of his own ideology. The English villages, with their teas and light talks, function as communal carnival outside the aristocratic castle. In public houses, people mix classes and accents without ritual barrier. Every conversation he overhears acts like an invitation into heteroglossia. Yet his participation remains tentative, he translates natural camaraderie into formulaic politeness. His failure to perceive dialogic vitality marks his alienation from time itself. Carnival passes around him unnoticed, laughter he cannot hear. Bakhtin proposed that the novel as a genre thrives on diversity of social languages. Ishiguro's genius lies in demonstrating what happens when that diversity is systematically excluded from a life. Stevens's entire existence is the attempt to become a single voice, flawless, neutral, mechanical. But life, by definition, resists neutrality, it demands encounter. Consequently, the butler's perfection becomes absurd, his monologue tragicomic. By the end, his carefully ordered sentences begin to tremble with unintended irony. When he recounts his proudest moment, continuing to serve guests while his father dies upstairs, the reader perceives catastrophe where he perceives triumph. Two value systems speak simultaneously through one utterance, professional dignity and human loss. This doubleness, unintended polyphony, is Ishiguro's supreme art. He transforms monologue into chorus without ever breaking stylistic restraint. The carnivalesque re-emerges more explicitly during Stevens's stop at the seaside town in the novel's closing scenes. There, sitting among holidaymakers, he finally perceives laughter as moral lesson. The crowd's easy sociability, the twilight banter, the lights reflecting on the water, all embody the folk festive spirit Bakhtin described, a suspension of correctness in favor of renewal. For a moment, Stevens contemplates joining this human carnival, he imagines learning the art of banter, of responding without fear. His tears at sunset are not mere regret, they signify awakening to language's true nature, open-ended, communal, unfinalizable. The great confession of unspent love to Miss Kenton fails to materialize, yet his tears articulate what words cannot, the birth of dialogic consciousness even within solitude. Ishiguro dares to show redemption without speech, carnival within quietude. The thematic core of the remains of the day may thus be phrased in Bakhtinian ethics, answerability. Stevens's tragedy stems from unfulfilled responsibility to answer others. He served Lord Darlington blindly, refusing moral response. He ignored Miss Kenton's appeals, he denied his own emotional voice. His life's remains are precisely those unanswered calls. Yet through narration, the belated act of telling, he begins to respond. The trip and its recollections constitute belated dialogue with the past. By confessing, even indirectly, he returns to the aesthetic of answerability, he acknowledges otherness. The final word, "Let us make our evening the best of what remains," signifies partial reconciliation, not closure, but humble participation in present time. Ishiguro's language attains density through restraint, he practices irony as structural principle. Every phrase balancing courtesy and pain becomes a micro-dialogue. It is, I dare say, one of the beautiful aspects of our profession, he notes, yet the reader attuned to context hears an opposite melody. This layering recalls Bakhtin's double-voiced discourse, speech that contains within itself an evaluation of its own tone. Stevens speaks obedience but conveys suffering, he describes subservience yet transmits critique. Ishiguro, like Dostoevsky, refuses authorial intervention, he releases characters to speak themselves, trusting polyphonic irony to express truth. The invisibility of authorial moralizing ensures that judgments arise in the interstices between voices, reader becoming co-creator of meaning. Even minor figures reinforce the polyphony. The brief story of Stevens's father encapsulates generational dialogue, two voices of professional faith colliding. The elder butler's rigidity mirrors the son's, but his death embodies collapse of speech without emotion. The scene's extraordinary power arises from linguistic minimalism, two sentences exchanged before silence claims them. Bakhtinian analysis reveals this as negative polyphony, meaning produced by contrast between mechanical propriety and unspoken love. Likewise, the young staff at Darlington Hall during Stevens's final years, talking freely, joking, form a chorus of New English. Their speech intrudes upon his perfect order, unsettling but also humanizing it. Heteroglossia invades monologue, time triumphs over stasis. Historically, Ishiguro's novel belongs to post-imperial Britain, a society confronting the loss of its own authoritative, master voice. The decline of empire mirrors Stevens's crisis, a whole civilization learning to live without the privilege of monologic certainty. The novel's quiet tone masks a vast cultural carnival, empire's narrative politely disassembled by plural voices of modernity. Within this transition, the remains of the day performs national psychoanalysis through speech. The butler's diary becomes England's confessional, his restraint symbol of collective nostalgia for order amid irrepressible heterogeneity. Yet Ishiguro does not ridicule, he listens. The dignity Stevens prizes, however misguided, possesses tragic beauty. It represents human longing for coherence, for meaning that transcends chaos. Bakhtin would warn that such aspiration must be tempered by dialogue. Ishiguro agrees, translating the warning into pathos. When Stevens recalls the great days, his longing merges with author's compassion. Polyphony here includes even the obsolete voice, no discourse is expelled from listening. The novel's ethical stance is therefore profoundly dialogic, critique without contempt, irony without cynicism. Finally, we must address the temporality of memory that structures the narrative. Ishiguro's seemingly calm retrospection conceals spiraling self-interrogation, each flashback reinterprets the last. Narration itself becomes dialogic process over time. The first-person form ensures that readers' understanding always lags behind, and finally overtakes the narrator's self-conception. This asynchronous comprehension, character unaware, reader aware, constitutes the ultimate double-voicedness. The story we read is not the one Stevens believes he is telling. His discourse, arrested in master-servant syntax, unwittingly reveals an inner carnival of loss. Ishiguro's art resides in this tension, the visible monologue continually dissolved by invisible dialogue with its own contradictions. As dusk concludes the seaside day, Stevens listens to strangers talking beneath the pier lights. Their laughter, echoing through wet air, becomes counter-song to his solitude. He recognizes his life's confinement to monologic duty, he perceives at last that joy demands responsiveness. In that recognition lies renewal. The final dusk, symbol of the remains, transforms sorrow into gentle illumination, even monologic life can awaken to dialogue. Ishiguro closes the narrative without redemption ceremony, yet with tonal shift toward openness, the soft note of hope that Bakhtin identified as essence of unfinalizability. The butler's narrative ends, but his consciousness newly dialogic looks toward tomorrow's dawn. Thus, the remains of the day stands as contemporary parable of language and responsibility. It transposes Bakhtin's philosophical drama of voices into the quiet interior of English history. Ishiguro's innovation lies in finding tragedy not in excess of utterance, but its absence, carnival not in riot but in delicate inversion of tone. Through restraint he proves that even silence can harbor polyphony. The novel becomes a requiem for the monologic soul, and a delicate hymn to the possibility of reply. In that final pause, when Stevens resolves to practice bantering, we hear the faint laughter of the carnival returning, modest, human, undramatic, but real. The servant's sentence opens toward the world, his solitude converts into expectation of answer. This is the remains of all days, the moment when language rediscovers its plural heart.